Today, just in the United States alone, there are 7 million people over the age of 65 with dementia. And worldwide, this number is 55 million. In just a few years, by 2030, the worldwide estimate is projected to increase to 78 million people. We don't have a cure for dementia. And while we continue to develop one, the best thing we can do is to focus on improving the quality of life for people diagnosed with dementia. So just from the perspective of how the built environment can make a positive impact, this poses the complex and very human challenge for designers and innovators. How do we create safe, meaningful places and experiences that help those diagnosed with dementia? And that's exactly the mission that our guest today, Maria Mortati, is on. Based in San Francisco, Maria is an experienced designer with her roots in museum and interaction design. And in the last few years, she's shifted her efforts to focus on healthcare-related projects alone, specifically in this world of memory care and dementia. A key part of my discussion with Maria is on her most widely recognized project, the Memory Care Experience Station. This immersive, multi-dimensional sort of pod is the first of its kind. It's a unique 4D experience that's kind of part gaming simulator and part storytelling device that stimulates all 5 senses in a variety of ways. It's essentially a sensory therapy session. So, wherever you are, perhaps on a walk or just driving to work, please settle in. It's a thoughtful, hopeful conversation about creativity, caregiving, and designing for one of the most complex challenges in healthcare today. Hi, Maria.
Hi.
How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
It's a pleasure to be with you again. Round 2, we had some technical difficulties last Friday, but I think we're past that and very happy to have this conversation with you about all the exciting things you're doing here in this space called interaction and experience design.
Mm-hmm.
Enjoy learning from you about what you're doing in the space.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Before we get to kind of what is the main attraction of this conversation, I wanted for myself to maybe validate some things that I've learned about your career, and for our audience to learn a little bit more about the origins of how you started into this line of work, graduating from Stanford with a design degree. Maybe if we can go back to that and talk about, that experience and how the career sort of started from there.
Sure. I will do this as quickly as possible. I studied studio art in college, drawing and painting and sculpture. And when I came out to California after college, I ended up working in the kind of early days of new media art and design. And then that kind of segued into web and interaction design and working for tech companies. And then after about a decade of that, I decided that I kind of didn't want to become a director level person. I still want to do creative work. So I went to the Stanford Joint Program in Design, where artists and designers were thrown in with mechanical engineers. This program went on years later to become the D School and the design thinking practice and things like that. That probably most of your audience might be familiar with. And there I ended up learning how to build and make somewhat mechanical things. And they started to look a lot like museum exhibits, kind of interactive museum exhibits. So when I graduated, I went to work in the field of exhibition design and exhibit development And so I worked for some studios, working on some big projects. I worked for the Exploratorium here in San Francisco, where you conceive, design, and build your own exhibits, working with, large teams. And then I went out on my own after quite some time and started to do kind of everything from making sort of delightful interactives for engaging people with contemporary art or science or history, kind of everything in between for that field.
It seems like the career path naturally is going to take you towards museum and exhibit design. I would think even some retail things where there's sort of a mixed media of technology and built, let's say, not necessarily the built environment, but built objects and scenes. In those early days, was there a project or two that kind of stayed with you, or maybe that stood out during that period of time that you were like, okay, I really see what I can do in this space and what this is all about,
Yeah, I think the things I took out of grad school that I think many people took into their careers was this sense of experimentation, and prototyping ideas, kind of that express test cycle, concept, which was very helpful in museums because there's a lot on the line. They feel that, these are very formal spaces. We're supposed to be the authority on this. And so just sort of that general value system of we want to learn from the people we are seeking to engage or attract. And we want to be able to do that in a more convivial way and a less precious way at the outset. And so I would say, projects I worked on, for example, at the Outdoor Exploratorium, they used, a very rigorous process. But you also start with building proof of concept prototypes and, trying them out with the public and, getting feedback and whatnot. And then sort of skipping ahead to doing larger museum projects, that sort of notion of helping the client engage with this process, helping the client understand the value of this. What do people need when they enter a contemporary art museum if you're going to ramp them up? So at the Baltimore Museum of Art, for example, we created, instead of an interactive gallery to learn about one artist, we created a gallery that was a platform where you could say, okay, we're going to help people learn how to engage with an idea that's across contemporary art.
Very cool. I mean, there's so many layers to it that it seems like it is absolutely has to be a very collaborative sort of process. I mean, you've got the stakeholder of the client intimately involved, yourself, maybe it's manufacturing, a mill worker. I would think lighting would be a big part of that too. That's very, very cool. And I know this whole part of experimentation and an iterative process is very much a big part of the whole D-School kind of thinking. Okay, so you're practicing, and now have your own business, but at some point now you've taken on this role as educator and went into teaching, actually, right? Is that somewhere along here where that kicked in?
Yeah. I started teaching with someone who became a close colleague on a couple of projects, Scott Miniman, who's a electromechanics expert and interaction design expert. And he brought me on to teach public interaction design studio classes at California College of the Arts in their graduate interaction design program. And then I went on to teach thesis studios and whatnot. But that was really exciting because we got to teach students and engage students with these ideas of not just, creating apps and things, which they were not always that excited about, but how do you make physical, experiences, and how do you make them in a physical space? So I taught for about 7 years But I haven't been teaching since then. Just my schedule couldn't allow it. And then, of course, the pandemic came along and put the kibosh on a lot of that stuff.
Well, and interestingly enough, I mean, I think therein lies that sort of, I don't want to say fork in the road, but that big turn of some personal things that happened in your life that's took you down this path towards a focus on health care and health-related types of projects. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that moment in time and what steered you in that direction.
Sure. Yeah. So about that time or just prior to the pandemic, I had some family members that were kind of at the end of their lives and kind of, managing that situation with my brothers. And, they were in care facilities. They had all kinds of complex issues and whatnot. So sort of not seeing what that world was like and kind of being shocked coming from the Bay Area where there's so much, innovation and, refinement and consumer product design and all this kind of stuff. And being not only in another part of the country, but being in this context where it was like none of that has trickled up or down, to that world,
in that industry
and into those environments. And that really troubled me because I thought, oh my God, like I could just come in here and say, hey, why don't we do this or that or the other thing? And, that would kind of help you guys out quite a lot in terms of making this space and this institution, work better for you. And then about the same time, the San Francisco campus for Jewish Living reached out to me kind of through the Stanford Design Alumni Network again. And they commissioned me to do this project called the Memory Care Experience Station. The leadership had this idea to do like something with technology and something with multisensory to engage their residents with mid to late stage dementia. And, they had worked with the gerontological architect, Alexis Denton, who helped them kind of do design competitions with students at UC Berkeley and kind of interior design or architects and whatnot to kind of develop some concepts.
They approached you with that level of development already sort of constructed?
Yeah, I mean, it was very, very high level. They did not know how to do that, not just how to do it or what really is going to make something engaging to somebody. So yes, that kind of set the stage for, while I was not an expert in dementia and therapies for people with dementia, I kind of had this sort of infrastructure of skills to take the project on.
Obviously the listeners they could go to your website and learn more about the project. But what were maybe some things along the way as you were starting to iterate and prototype? Were there any things that happened where you were like, okay, this isn't going to work like this? Was it a materiality thing? I don't know. I'd love to know if there was anything interesting that happened as you were experimenting.
Yeah. One thing we tried out were driving games, those simulation experiences where you have the wheel and the pedals and the shifter and all that kind of stuff. And that was a huge fail, from the infrastructure for the staff, like the learning curve, the setting up the software to get it to work. But then when we tried it out with residents or a resident, we did a lot of work to try. We knew at that point what they needed. And we did a lot of work to try to mediate the software to make it work. But the resident just became so locked on to the experience that he literally could not let go. Literally.
Wow.
Like for an hour and a half, we couldn't get him to disengage. So we sort of suspected that, we knew it was going to be too complex, but we suspected it might need to be simplified. So we learned that. We tried out VR ourselves. And again, this was like during the pandemic, and it was very clear. Like we kind of had a hunch that it wasn't going to work because it's not truly multisensory. It's not very social. But also and then putting something on someone's head and then putting it on another person's head. And, there's all kinds of virus and issues and whatnot.
Oh, right.
Right? Especially at that time, which presents a big issue for staff. It's complicated. And the staff said, we can't put things on them. They will freak out. And also, you can't mess with their sense of cognitive perception and physical perception about the world around them because they are losing it. And so they need all the kind of environmental markers that they can get. We started with a pretty complex system where we tried to throw everything at them. So we wanted something resonant and also kind of fun. So it's like familiar to them somehow. So, a simulated driving experience, even if it's like highly resolved, you don't want to obviously have any of that uncanny valley kind of perception happening where it's like, this isn't quite real. But the scenery wants to look familiar or to them. Do you know what I mean? So we had residents, for example, that they would come in and they were very shut down and they didn't participate in activities much. And then they would, kind of put their feet on the pad and then start the experience. And we had this, one gentleman in particular who kind of like sat up, put his hands on the wheel and, started driving, so it was real enough, but it also gave them enough familiarity and kind of markers for them to feel like it was believable and it was also not scary and kind of out of their control.
I'm interested to know, obviously the experience station is something broader and more valuable, than an auto simulator. And I know the applications, multiple applications that you're trying to incorporate into this are beyond just auto simulator.
Yes.
So if you could talk a little bit about, what the purpose of this, again, is to bring some joy and some comfort and maybe it's memory recall. So what were some other aspects or applications, if you will, for the experience station that you were sort of experimenting with?
Sure. So the experience station can support, it's a platform for engagement.
Yep.
And it's a tool for staff to measure outcomes. You manage outcomes, not just measure, but manage outcomes. And it's a way for loved ones to have a positive experience with the residents. So we have cooking a pizza in Rome, walking through the park, the space shuttle launch, all kinds of like bird watching and sing-alongs and dance and, playing with just light and color and whatnot. So we kind of pulled from what we knew were the greatest hits of kind of experience design, but having studied dementia and having worked very closely with the life enrichment staff like Alona Root Chang, Daphne Valadez, who are from the life enrichment staff, were not just our stakeholders, but our collaborators, on this project. It wouldn't have happened without sitting there for 200 sessions to develop this thing. And so we kind of had an axis. On one end, you had very soothing experiences, and on the other end, you had very stimulating experiences. And then you had people that were high functioning and people that were low functioning. And so we said, okay, we need to plot out, let's come up with a dozen experiences that kind of either fit along that spectrum of soothing to stimulating, but then we want it to offer something to everyone along that disease progression kind of axis.
Is there version 2 and 3 and 4 still? Are you trying to evolve this? I hope.
I hope so too. So right now we are working on getting funding to do next stages of development.
Interesting.
And so when I came onto the project, we had the shell of the building, so it was just kind of hard hats and boots and vests. But the space had already been, built and defined. And so we couldn't claim a room. So we had to develop something that was somewhat mobile. It's very big and you can move it around. But we were always trying to figure out, how could we make this as immersive feeling as possible, even though you're going to be in the family lounge or something like that.
Overall, the best thing about this project, I think, also is just the reaction, right? Or the responses that you're getting, at least from the San Francisco campus. Talk a little bit about that. I think it's overwhelmingly been positive.
Yeah, out of those roughly 200 sessions, we created an observation tool that this designer Andrea Moed created for us. And basically what it did was to say, how was the person before? How were they during the experience? Did they want to come back when they were asked right after? And then how were they later in the day? Were they holed up in their room or were they participating in activities? And so that tool is very helpful for us to evaluate how things were going. And then I was also taking some video of my own notes for developing the station. And what we found was that, we had a 90-something success rate with people that were either very positive or a positive experience. And we had very minimal, kind of neutral experiences where we couldn't really tell. And then we had very, very few people who had a negative experience or didn't want to come back.
Well, so you can design the experiences not just based on the individuals' past and their personal experiences, but their, for lack of a better term, kind of their tempo and their temperament, and kind of fine-tuning that is really got some potential for magic there, I think.
Yeah, it's great. Because you're really
so amazing.
These people have their own interests, right? And then somebody who's maybe wants something upbeat in the morning may want something soothing in the afternoon, or maybe a couple months later, this experience isn't appropriate for them, but that one is, so these are unique individuals in very dynamic situations. So you want to be able to have a tool that's flexible enough to kind of meet them wherever they are.
Well, it sounds like you created it.
Yeah, we did. It was
you did.
A team effort.
I don't know, how you could have landed on a more meaningful and all-encompassing project than this. That said, one of the key questions here in this podcast that I like to throw out there is unlimited sort of resources and budget and time. Has this unlocked some other what would be a dream project? I don't know, find one almost better than this, but if there were one, yeah.
Okay, so aside from curing dementia,
sure, yeah,
or having world peace and prosperity for everybody,
I'm with you on that. I'll help you with that one. I'd be glad to help.
I would love to put together a lab that looks at either the best practices in, creating a practice, a field of practice that is both about how do you do this as a designer or technologist, how could architects and caregivers engage both inform the development of products and solutions, but also to create things that are products and solutions for them and for these contexts. So, and maybe it would be aligned with a research institute, for example. So we could have clinicians on staff. We could do, PET scans and things like that, or find ways to do non-invasive, observation and validation. And also to be able to quantify sort of qualitative observations, because you need to be able to identify, whether something is working, but you have this sort of anecdotal evidence. You have video evidence. So how can we, for example, AI would become huge, in terms of the development and also sort of the output of different types of experiences like the station, where you could have cameras that would anonymously track when, people's responses. They'd get a baseline for a person. But now we can say, okay, their head tilted, they went this way, for example. So I think that's very important for researchers and funders to be able to take that seriously, to be able to measure delight, to be able to say that this is something that is desirable.
The measuring aspect seems quite intriguing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's really important when you want to get funding, for example.
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's validating your concept. I wanted to thank you so much. This is tremendous work you're doing. It's so fascinating. Mm-hmm. It really is such a cool project that it's amazing.
Well, thank you. And I really owe thanks to the San Francisco Campus for Jewish Living for having the genesis of the idea and for reaching out to me, and to all our funders that, this was a grant-funded project. So all the funders that got behind it and, made it possible.
Well, thank you again, Maria, for your time. This has been fantastic.
Thank you.
I look forward to reconnecting again and learning more about how the Experience Station continues to grow and evolve, and hopefully we can have another discussion about it.
I would love it. Thanks again for reaching out.
The statistics are truly a bit shocking around dementia. According to Wikipedia, dementia is currently the 7th leading cause of death worldwide, and we've got 10 million new cases reported every year. This is approximately 1 every 3 seconds. How are we going to deal with this continued growth? Ensuring access to improved caregiving services, developing new treatments, and new experience technologies such as Maria's will hopefully continue to emerge to help us with the quality of life improvement for those with dementia. We need more people like Maria out there to help us continue to explore and invent new innovative techniques that will help in this effort. I really hope you found our conversation to be insightful and informative. And a quick note to Maria. Congrats on your recognition in 2022 as a finalist in Fast Company's World Changing Ideas Awards. And speaking of recognition from Fast Company, our next guests just won their 2025 Most Innovative Companies Award. I'll be talking to CEO Noah Waxman and Chief Creative Officer Marcelo Pontes about how their company, called Cactus, is continuing to succeed in their mission of breaking down the barriers between consulting, the built environment, and technological innovation. And lastly, a quick plug about us. To learn more about everything that we at Bialik are up to these days and how our team is driving innovation in the spaces that we help to create, please come visit us at www.bialik.com. That's BIALEK. And follow us on Instagram at Bialik Social. Until next time, stay well and keep on wondering.